Well, welcome to the Cut for Time podcast here at the Canton United Methodist Church. My name is Pastor Clay. I'm joined by Eric Stearns, and today is a different day in the life of the Cut for Time podcast because this is the first time that neither Eric or I preached since we started doing Cut for Time podcasts. As we mentioned in our last episode before the start of the new year, I am on parental leave, and so I'm not preaching this month. And so Pastor Steve Zebarth, my immediate predecessor, also one of my very dearest friends, is preaching for me for the next couple of weeks. And today is our first conversation about one of Steve's sermons. Sunday he preached out of Luke 14 and talked about how we have this opportunity for a fresh start here in the new year. So let's get into it.
Sounds good. So I thought this passage was very heavy.
Yes.
So I was hoping that you could give like a 5-minute synopsis or something on what Jesus meant in this whole thing.
Yeah, so this is one of the places where Jesus is not as friendly. We kind of seem to just pigeonhole Jesus into this holy, lowly, meek, and mild type of a character. Some of the words that Jesus said have some teeth on them. And this is one of those passages where Jesus is really getting after the crowds and saying, you know, if you're going to be here for the right reasons. And this also taps into something that Jesus does in Matthew's gospel a lot, where Jesus speaks hyperbolically, where like Jesus is not literally saying you have to hate everything in order to follow Jesus. No, what Jesus is saying is that Jesus has to come first, or that God has to come first, or that faith has to come first in order to follow Jesus faithfully.
Sure.
And so one of the ways that he does that in Matthew's gospel, in the Sermon on the Mount, is where he says, you know, if your right hand's causing you to sin, cut it off. You got a left one, you're fine. You know, Jesus is not really calling for bodily mutilation. Jesus is saying that if something is causing you to fall short of the glory of God, get rid of it because the glory of God's way better. And so this is Luke picking up on that, and Jesus knows that the crowds, you know, like what Steve said in the sermon, people are following Jesus for very different reasons. You know, if they're hungry, they want to get fed. If they're poor, they want to get rich. If they lack political power, they want that political power of following the Messiah. But it gets down to the nitty-gritty of our lives when we say, if you don't hate everything else, if everything else does not pale in comparison to following God, then we're doing this wrong, and we need to fix it. And so Jesus gives us this opportunity with these hard words, gives us this opportunity to, for better or for worse, fix it. To ask the hard question of why exactly are we following Jesus, and are we willing to put Jesus first in all things? And all means all. All is a big word in that instance, but everything else is secondary if we're truly going to follow Jesus as fully as Jesus wants us to follow him.
So Jesus, calls us out to hate our family. Mm-hmm. That seems very strong.
It does.
And like you said, it's hyperbolic. Like, is this common for Jesus?
A little bit, yeah. Like, this is not the only time that Jesus goes after family. There's an incident in the Gospels where Mary and the brothers show up to wherever Jesus is, and the crowds are like, hey, dude, your mother and brothers are here. And he's like, cool, but my mother and brothers are the ones that do the will of my Father. Like, literal Mary and literal the brothers are in wherever Jesus was at that time. And Jesus kind of appears to not be able to care less, you know, and that his true family, his true kindred is how, you know, a lot of, you know, the Bible's broken up in like into sections and stuff, and sometimes sections have titles, and like this is like the section says the true kindred of Jesus, like the true family of Jesus are the ones that do God's will. And like that's hard when, you know, we know so little about Joseph, the earthly father of Jesus, and we know so much more about Mary, and then to have Mary and the brothers be literally right there, and for him to just completely dismiss them and not stop what he's doing and say, okay, cool, my mom and brothers are here. Like, my family is very tight. And if my mother and my sister showed up somewhere, I'm going to be tempted to blow off a lot of stuff in order to hang out with them. But Jesus presents us with this very different way of viewing the world and viewing family, And again, it comes back to putting Jesus first, putting God first in all things. In Jesus' estimation, more important than your family ties is your tie to God, and making sure that's as strong as possible. And like taking it so far as to say in the scripture that we talked about that Steve preached on, I hate. It's almost as if I hate them. I'm so committed this way that it's almost that I hate being over here. And that's this is one of Jesus' harsher teachings. I think it is very much like what Steve said, that there are people in the crowd saying, okay, Jesus, like back off a little bit, or that maybe they just stopped following Jesus altogether because it was just too extreme for them to handle. But Jesus wants us to fully and faithfully follow God and follow God's teachings, sometimes to the detriment of things that make us more comfortable, like family.
Is it almost like you need to worry about your own eternity way more than worrying about keeping your family happy?
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yep. And I think the cliche idea that you hear is that faith doesn't have grandkids. Like it's about you and your faith to work out what Paul says in the book of Philippians, to work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. And that's our call for all of God's people. Just because grandma has this deep faith doesn't mean that you do.
Yeah.
And God
That's
knows
a good point.
that. And so it's important for all of us to embrace the opportunity we have at the start of a new year. It's important for all of us to really think about where we are in our lives of faith, and to think about what could those things be that we're putting ahead of our devotion to Jesus Christ, because they're right in front of us. But so one of the things that we have to deal with is the fact that in our lives there are things that we have put ahead of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And thankfully and mercifully and hopefully we've learned from those things, and we're no longer doing those things that are contrary to what Jesus would have us to do, or that make it evident that our allegiance lies elsewhere. But so that can lead to us having just a lot of regret around certain things. And the regret isn't necessarily a bad thing to feel. Like, we do make mistakes and we are wrong from time to time. It's hard to admit and it's hard to live with, but it's the reality.
Right.
Is that sometimes we are in the wrong, or sometimes we have gotten off course and off track and allowed our priorities to get out of line. And so this New Year idea gives us the opportunity to realign things so that our lives look more like the gospel every day. And whether that starts on January 1st or January 2nd or March 20th, it's all the invitation is always there for us to have these conversations. But this, because it is such a part of our national zeitgeist, like the whole New Year, New Me thing. This is a good opportunity for us to take stock and say, where are some of those regrets that I have, and what have I learned from them to make me a better Christian? Obviously I don't think that you need to get into specifics about this, Eric, but what have you learned from the regrets of your life?
You can answer it very cliche and be like, if you're not learning from any of your things that you did wrong, you're not improving. Obviously, I have plenty of regrets and mistakes that I have made that I've had to learn from. Right. There are times when I've interacted with people the way I should not have interacted with them. I don't treat them how I would like to be treated.
Sure.
And that kind of stuff always hangs with you. Like, man, I really should not have said something. I really shouldn't have blown someone off, whatever that might be.
Sure.
And I try really hard to... Often I do it where I blow off someone's concerns. Where I don't see the concern, I don't understand the concern, or I don't see that it's really that big of an issue, or something to that effect.
Sure.
So I'm trying really hard, and I have tried really hard to value concerns that are brought up to me, and try to steer them in a direction to help them fix those concerns. Like, for instance, if someone at work is having an issue with someone else at work.
Sure.
Okay. In the past, I've just blown it off and essentially said I don't care.
Right.
but that's not the right way to handle it either, because obviously they have a genuine concern over something that's going on.
Yep.
What I've tried to do is to encourage them to talk to that person directly.
Sure. Yeah.
And stop blowing them off, because when you blow someone off,
Yeah.
when you ignore what they have going on, it just makes them feel like less of a person, and that's not where we should be.
Mm-hmm. And definitely a very scriptural thing, because Jesus dealt with a lot of people that were more inclined to just blow people off. And they're a leper, they're dangerous, they're sick, they're disgusting, or they're the woman caught in adultery. They're scandalous. We can't be near them. We can't associate with them. And Jesus is like, I'm going to go talk to them. It's going to be fine.
How about for you?
Yeah, definitely. So I would say that, a lot of my regrets have been around viewing people that I disagree with as less than. If you don't see a theological thing, the way that I see it, you're wrong. And then, I just write you off. And you don't see a certain person the same way that I do. You're whatever, and just learning to remember the inherent value of all people, because we're all made in God's image. Language that I use now, like if I don't like someone, I will say to a friend of mine, hey, I am struggling with this person. What do you see that I'm not seeing? Usually the problem is not the other person. Usually the problem is me. Mm-hmm. And realizing that and letting that be okay and not just staying in that is really something that I have had to learn through the years.
Well, this is typically the part of the episode where we discuss what next week is, but since this is different, I'll ask the question. You fill me in with what you know.
Sounds good. So what I know is that Steve is starting a 4-week sermon series starting this coming Sunday on the 9th of January called Getting Over It, How We Start the Year Without the Extra Baggage. The sermon title for Sunday is Carrying the Weight. Mm-hmm. And from the synopsis that Steve gave me, Steve is going to be talking about the fact that, kind of what we're talking about with this week, carrying the weight of our regrets and the burden of our, of what we need in order to have a fresh start. That we don't have to carry that. That's not our job to carry that Jesus calls us and invites us to lay that down and then to really leave it laid down so that Jesus can deal with it and we don't have to. We are free because of the life and death and ministry of Jesus Christ. We are free to live into the grace of Jesus and to lay those mistakes that we've had, those regrets that we have, to lay them down and to live more in the light of the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Sure.
So
sounds good.
That's where we're heading.
Well, thanks for bearing with us on this little bit different format. I hope you still gain something out of it, and join us again next week. Join Pastor Steve on Sunday for the message, and then back here next week for the podcast.
Thanks for listening to our Cut for Time conversation. Join us for worship in person or on Facebook Live Sundays at 10 o'clock Central Time. And now go in peace and serve the Lord.